my father was gone a lot, so I didn't have that close relationship with him. I know we'll get into that more later, but that was pivotal for me because I also experienced homosexual feelings and thoughts.
Have you ever talked to your father about your homosexual lifestyle?
After my conversion, yes.
But not before that?
Not during, no.
So while you was living as a gay, you never talked to your father
I never
about
talked to my father about it. I was living like more of a double life, so you can't give to someone what you don't have. But he did give us what he did know. He was my provider. My father has changed. He also has had his conversion with the Lord. I'm grateful that I have my dad.
Welcome everybody. Today I have another guest with me. We're going to talk about fatherhood and influence of a father. I think nothing can be better than a personal testimony. Today I'm glad that you can join me and share with us your personal journey with your father. But before we'll talk about your father, can you please introduce yourself and tell us about yourself, about your journey?
Sure, yeah, I'm glad to be here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Daniel Varela, so thank you for listening and exploring about this topic that I think is important. I grew up in the southeastern part of the United States. I have Puerto Rican background, so both my parents are Puerto Rican who grew up in the island of Puerto Rico, and my father's in the military. So I grew up moving around a lot, adventures, and a lot of fun memories with just exploring my environment, making new friends in the neighborhood, with positive values being instilled in my family, such as hard work, being studious, even being Christian. Even though my parents weren't very devout Christians when I was younger, that was an important thing in my family growing up. My parents loved each other. I could see that they loved each other by their hugs and their kisses, and they would be affectionate towards each other. My dad would tell my sister and I just have one sibling, she's younger than me. He would tell us that he loves us, he'd kiss us and hug him. He'd want us to hug him like when he got back from work. So that was very typical in my household. School years were pretty good in terms of academics. I would try to stay focused with school, but I felt different because I wasn't black or white. And especially at that time, prejudice and people's biases, were more obvious, I would say. So I would feel different and I would feel confused about my nationality, my ethnicity. So for most people, they may just say, oh, you were born in the United States, so you're American. So, okay, but I don't look like a typical American. Most people think I look Arabic, I'm Hispanic. So, I just looked different. And then being a child, I would just feel different than my peers. So that was something that brought me some insecurity and feeling uneasy. And then my father was gone a lot, so I didn't have that close relationship with him. I know we'll get into that more later, but that was pivotal for me because I also experienced homosexual feelings and thoughts. And my father not being there, I had a lot of feminine energy around me with my mom, my younger sister, my aunt, my grandmother. And in my environment, the example of other men was not positive. I felt they were rough around the edges. I couldn't relate to the aggression and the objectification of women. So I just felt like I respected women more than the men in my environment. So I didn't want to be like them. So it made me feel even more different as a boy. And then I'm more sensitive in my temperament, more communicative, expressive than most boys growing up. So I just didn't relate to the rough and tumble and the sports and the competitiveness. I had some of that, but just not as much. So I just felt even more different and insecure, and I felt ashamed for those same-sex feelings that I was having. And I didn't have anyone to talk to about that. So I spent a lot of my early years suppressing that and trying to ignore it and just praying to God to help me, because I would hear negative things about gay people, that they were disgusting, that they were bad. Sometimes boys would joke around, not with me, but just comments about gay people and stuff. So that sent me messages that were bad. those people are bad. And if I can relate to those people, then that means I was bad. So that was my logic as a child, but I kept it to myself. So I was living like more of a double life, I would say. So at church, I would play violin. My parents would be involved, and I felt at peace there. I was in what's called Pathfinders and Adventurers, which is kind of like Boy Scouts for those that are not familiar with Pathfinders, Adventurers. Actually, I was a Boy Scout too at some point. So I liked adventure. I liked connecting with people in that way, other boys that way. So that was positive, and a good distraction. But there was one thing that happened as well in my childhood that was really important and changed my mindset. And that was when I was exposed to pornography at 8 years old by one of my friend's older brothers. And I was just, being adventurous, exploring. We would hang out. And then one night he asked me if I wanted to see something. So that's when he showed me pornography. And when he showed me, I remember feeling more attracted to the man in the pornographic film, and I felt confused, and I also felt excited and pleasure because of the hormones that was being released, and I started to act out the things I would see. So it was with my friend who was my age, like we did exploration together, and I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know why, and I didn't know who to turn to for help. So that was something that started there, and then it progressively got worse. So what I mean by that is, although I was in tune with my academics, trying to be, like the man of the house, my father wasn't home because he was deployed a lot. So I had high responsibilities and expectations for myself. But then there was one part of my life that I was hiding that I would go to in private, which was to pornography and masturbation. So that habit carried on after maybe when I was 10, where I picked up more heavily. And I would even have times where I would unintentionally expose other people to pornography, and other people like older than me would show me porn. So that was a very important part of my life that I would hide from my family, and would go to whenever I was stressed out, when I was sad, anxious, bored, or just wanting to have something for fun. So I would just go to that for my leisure, my hobby. But I knew it was not good for me. I just didn't know what to do about it. So I would say that a lot of my childhood, I was depressed and anxious in many ways because of the same-sex attraction, and then the bad habit of pornography and masturbation, because I was going to church. So I was brought up knowing that that was a sin, but also that it was hurting my mind and hurting my heart. So I was feeling more lonely when I would go to pornography. I was feeling disconnected from my family. And my family liked to watch TV a lot. And when my dad was home, he liked to play video games. So I remember telling my mom, because I was very communicative, so I would tell her, like, Mom, I called her Mommy because we would speak Spanish. So I'm like, Mommy, I don't feel connected with the family. I feel like we're just like watching TV a lot and on our phones, and I don't feel like connected. And I would communicate that, but they wouldn't know what to do on like how to connect more. And in middle school, when I got a phone for the first time, I explored the online world, which has its good things like social media, but the dark side of social media was what I found out quickly when I was on social media apps. And I would find other young men and older men that were gay to talk to them about that part of my life.
So you finally found someone to talk about something that you was hiding for a long time.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, your father was not the one to whom you feel comfortable to talk to. So you found just strangers who would go in line with your feelings and your attractions.
Exactly. And it was not just, I wouldn't talk to my dad or my mom or anyone in my family about that part of my life. But I know the purpose of our talk is to, emphasize the relationship with the father. But I didn't confide in either one of them with that. And especially not my dad, because I cared about what he thought about me. I felt like not like him not as rough as him, not as strong as him, not as manly as him. So I felt insecure and not confident within myself.
So if we will speed up a little bit, where this lead you to, this desire or identity being as a gay? Did you start to live a life, gay life?
Yes, I eventually did go into the homosexual lifestyle. I went to a Christian university.
At the same time?
Yes, while I was in the same-sex relationship. I actually was living in student housing with my then boyfriend at a Christian university. And we were not open about it to everyone, but if you knew, you knew, and if you didn't, you didn't. It was more like don't ask, don't tell. So, which was easy to do because that's what I had done my whole life, which was not telling anyone about what was going on. If you knew and you could pick up on my mannerisms, or if you could, put me in a stereotype, then you could probably figure it out. But I just wasn't open about it. So yes, I was in the same-sex relationship. But the minute I got in that relationship, I felt like it was not right. And I would hear the voice of God, and he would tell me, Daniel, this is not my plan for you. So when I would hear that, I would think, well, maybe I just need to give it some time to get used to being in this relationship. But I would get these strong impressions that this was not the path for me, which was conflicting with my feelings because I thought I loved my boyfriend. He had everything that I thought I wanted in a man. He was hardworking, attractive, nice, respectful, respectable person in the community. So I had my feelings above what I thought was right, because I still felt that homosexuality was a sin based off the Bible, because that was my faith. My faith as a Christian was built on what the Word of God has to say. So for me, that was where my values, where they came from, but my life was not in alignment with that. So I just kind of dismissed God for a time. I just thought he had no relevance for me, because if he wanted me to be straight, he would have made me straight. That was my logic. So I just lived my life being a good person. I went to graduate school at some point to get my master's in social work, and that was a time where my life started to change, because I had a crossroad experience where I saw my future. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about my personal testimony, because that's not the focus for today. But
if I can pause here, Daniel, is there any resource that we could guide people if they want to learn more about your life? Do you have somewhere recorded your personal testimony?
Yes. If you go on YouTube, you could find on 3ABN Dare to Dream Network. It's a series called Strategies for Strongholds. And I'm the first episode, but there's multiple episodes which talk about sexual sin and how to overcome, which I think is very relevant for a lot of men in particular. And they take a Christian viewpoint on it as well as a scientific viewpoint. So for those that aren't really religious, I think they can also benefit from the episodes.
Daniel's journey, personal journey, I encourage, and we will leave the link down below for people to watch Daniel's personal testimony.
So yeah, I had a crossroad experience where I was hearing God's voice more and more, and he was sending me messengers of warning. So people that would say in love and in kindness, gently, that homosexuality was a sin, and asking me questions that if I'm ready, if Jesus were to come a second time, would I be ready? So those were really pivotal questions, because it led me to prayer and reading the Bible while I was living in student housing with my boyfriend, drinking, smoking marijuana, and partying. And I was searching for this God that apparently is trying to get my attention. So that was what led me to a crossroad experience where I ended up letting go of my homosexual relationship, because the Lord had my heart, meaning he affirmed me as a man through the book of Psalms. He took away anxiety. He took away depression. He gave me purpose and joy and peace. And I didn't have that before having a relationship with God. So I knew I could trust him. So after I broke up with my then boyfriend, the day in 2019, the day after my birthday, which is September 19, so on September 20th, I crossed paths with a young woman who was also a student in the graduate program. We didn't intentionally meet each other, but we met at a Christian concert. she became my now wife. And that was the first time I met her. And we were talking, and I shared with her my testimony. I felt impressed too. And at the end of the concert, I was looking into her eyes, and I was drawn to her. And I'm like, wow, I'm actually drawn to her figure. Like, she's attractive to me. And this thought crossed my mind. It was like, this is going to be your future wife. And I ignored that thought. I dismissed that thought because I was not ready to be in a relationship. I had a couple of years of what I call restoration and healing. So from 2019 to the end of 2022, I started to go to therapy. I felt impressed that I needed to work on my sex and lust addiction. So I went to a 12-step program that was faith-based with other men of my faith who were struggling with the same thing and who were looking for victory. So I started to go to a men's group, and that was very healing for my identity as a man, and it helped me heal in deep ways because I experienced true godly love with other men that was vulnerable and real, but that was safe and that was not sexual. So that was very healing for me on that level. And after that, I ended up starting to feel content in my life, in my career, in my relationships with my family, with myself, with God. And the Lord even called me to go to church, and I became youth director. So I was busy doing that and my purpose as a social worker as well. And I was fine, and I started to feel lonely though. And I asked God, like, if you could change my lifestyle, if you could change what I dress, what I eat, my friend group, can you change this part of my life? And I didn't think he could because I still saw myself as gay. And so long story short, he told me to pray for a wife, and I laughed at God because I thought that was impossible for me because I saw myself as homosexual because I still had those feelings. And I prayed because God told me to, and as an obedient child, I thought that I needed to practice trusting God. So I would pray, and my wife and I, we crossed paths in December 2022 at a youth convention where I was sharing my testimony. And that was just the beginning of our flourishing relationship. We were intentional friends for 3 months. Then we got confirmation from God, which we have our own testimony, which you can probably put a link if those would like to hear that.
Will be.
And then we dated. Then we got married in May 2024, and we were both social workers working as therapists before being called to ministry. So we now work in a ministry called Coming Together Ministry, where we address sexual integrity issues. Whether they're gay issues or not, we address pornography, adultery, abortion, manhood, womanhood, and topics such as what you're talking about today as well, as we see that there's a growing need for people, especially Christians, that are ashamed to talk about these topics and need help and support. So in short, that's where God has took me out of, and this is where I'm at now by His grace.
Wow, Walter, thank you for being open and sharing your testimony. That's a journey.
Yes, it was, and it still is a journey.
It's still a journey, yes, but now it's kind of like a different type of journey from trying to find and identify yourself and be in peace.
Exactly.
If I got it right, you share that you kind of like believed in God and what He's saying, but you found joy in something that what He's saying is not good. And that's why this double life caused destruction in your personal understanding what life is about.
Exactly.
Let's switch toward talking about your father. What kind of person he was while he was growing up?
So I want to start off by saying my father has changed. He also has had his conversion with the Lord. And the person that I grew up with, as my father, I would say he was more serious. He was hardworking and very just kept to himself, but fun. So like we would go on vacations a couple times a year. Like he liked to play video games.
Together
Those
with
were the
you.
fun parts, huh?
He would play video games with you or by
I
himself?
would watch him play video games because he liked to play the video games that were like solo video games. So he wouldn't play with me necessarily, but he would buy us game consoles. My sister and I, like we had like a PlayStation at some point, an Xbox at some point, a Wii at some point. So he was very into like electronics and video games, but also he liked to work out and he liked to run. So whenever I was So because he wasn't there a lot, because he was deployed with the military and the army, whenever he would come back, when I was in my early teens, I think he noticed that we weren't really close. And I think he wanted to change that. So he decided to encourage me to work out with him and run together because he saw that was my interest. Because I felt so different from him. We didn't really connect on many levels. And then when he came back from deployment, his mind was different. That's a reality that many veterans experience. He does have post-traumatic stress disorder. It wasn't as bad for him, but he still had his moments. Trust and believe, he still had his moments.
I think we all do.
We all do, yes. So those moments were a little bit difficult sometimes, which I think put a strain on our relationship. But I was bitter towards him when I was younger. I felt angry that he wasn't the person that I felt like I needed. Like I wanted more of his love and care. I wanted more of that vulnerable connection with him. I wanted to hear about his feelings. I wanted to hear about stories of how he grew up. I wanted to hear about his insecurities and his struggles because I wanted to relate to my dad, a man who wasn't perfect, because we know he's not perfect. So I wanted to talk about it because I'm not perfect too. Like these are the things that I'm struggling with as a young man. So I was really craving that and I wanted that from him.
So you're talking about your personal expectations from your father.
Exactly.
And what was lacking? Because one of the questions was, but we can cover it right now, something that you expected him, but it was not there. It was not present. You was lacking this connection with your father where he would talk about himself and talk about you. That's something what you needed, but he didn't provide to you.
Exactly. And I don't think he knew how. He himself came from a broken family. He grew up with his grandparents. His father was his neighbor, but he had a stepmom with another. They had children. My dad's dad had children with a new wife, basically. So that caused a natural division between my dad and his dad, because my dad's mom was my grandfather's first wife. And they separated, they divorced. So I don't think my dad knew how to have vulnerability and intimacy with his children. And I don't hold that against him. He didn't have that. So you can't give to someone what you don't have. But he did give us what he did know. And what he would do growing up, he would tell us this. He would say, when you guys have children one day, you're going to understand. And we're doing the best that we can. We can't give you much, but we can give you an education. So he was really invested in my sister and I's education. He was tried to have fun a couple of times a year. Like I would really summarize it down to that. Like he would do that for us. But when it came to being vulnerable, open communication, being available, like he didn't know how to do that because he himself didn't experience that from his father. So as a teenager, I would feel bitterness towards my dad, but this still small voice would remind me, like, your dad is doing the best that he can do. And so that would make me feel compassion for him. That would make me feel empathetic towards my father. And so I just would just try to let it go.
What is the earliest memory that you have, particularly with your father? Do you have something that you can share?
Yeah, I think I remember, I don't know if many people remember this part of their life, but I remember being like a baby toddler and my dad was holding me. Actually, when you asked me that, that's what crossed my mind. I remember he was laying down and he had me. He was just carrying me. And I felt warm, I felt his love for me at that stage. I also remember, so sometimes I would go to sleep in my parents' room because I was afraid of the dark, because I used to see more like paranormal activity in the home. So that would freak me out. So I would feel nervous and I would sleep in their room and I would see my dad waking up really early, like 5 a.m. And he'd wake up and immediately he'd get up and he would like start doing sit-ups. And as a kid, I would think, wow, like I'm really tired. And he's like working out right now. Like that's my dad. Wow. And so I admired him for his hardworking nature and pushing himself. he did like to give us good things. Like he would, like I mentioned earlier, like he wanted us to have fun. He'd try to buy us game consoles. Like he would try to like buy us nice clothes and material things to make us happy. Like he would do that. I can honestly say that my father would do that. He would tell us that we're attractive, that we're, lovable, like, so like that's what he would do to give us value. Yeah.
So when you're saying value, that's important part of life of everybody. And if you would summarize, what values or lesson did your father instill in you?
I would say, even though I wouldn't see it, he would tell me that I was a leader. And whenever he would tell me that, I felt like it was like a half truth. I'm just being honest, because I was insecure. I had a lot of insecurities. So for him to tell me that I was a leader, I would be like, but how? So then my insecurities would speak. And I would tell my dad, well, I don't see myself as a leader. And he would say, you are a leader because you're different. You just need to be good as you are. You're good. Like, you're smart. You take initiative. Like, that's a leader, and you lead by example. So I would just receive it, but I wouldn't be open to it. But now as an adult, I can look back and say that my dad would encourage me, and I am a leader now, and I'm not perfect. No leader is perfect, but I feel like he helped me with starting that independence and being a positive influence and continuing that in my current role in life. And he would instill the value of God, even though my dad wasn't perfect. No one's perfect, but he would try to occasionally have like family devotions. We would go to church every Sabbath, and he was involved in church. So for me, my dad was a Christian man, and even though at times I felt like he was being hypocritical, I knew that God was important, and that was what he would instill in me.
So you mentioned earlier that your father hugged you, was telling that he loves you. That's the way how he showed his affection toward you, yes?
Yes.
And it was like a constant, stable thing in your life.
Yes.
It was not once in a while. He was always...
No, he would do that. Yeah, he would do that. And that was really helpful, because if my dad didn't do that, at some point I was depressed, so depressed that I was suicidal. And I actually almost jumped out the car when my mom was driving. So if my dad didn't hug me and kiss me, I think I probably would have, it would have been worse. So he would. And he actually, there would be times where he would tell me that there would be soldiers of his that they would commit suicide. So I think my dad, even though he was a man of a few words, I think he knew what was going on with me, but he wouldn't talk about it with me. But his affections and his love, it was enough to give me hope, and it was enough to give me comfort.
Do you think he had any influence on your major decision making in your life? Was it positive or negative influence? But did he influence how you was making decisions in your life, or not? Not at all.
That's a difficult one, because I really wasn't close to my dad. Like I remember positive things with him, and there were positive things. It's just, I'm a very deep and open person, and I value that. So we just are different in that way. So I didn't trust him with the level of intimacy that I needed. So I would search out other avenues for that. So in short, no, my dad didn't have a say in why I chose social work, for example. I chose social work, for example, because I did a personality test in high school with a professional. Like all the seniors had to do that, and it was in my personality type. And in my mind, my logic was I need to do something that comes naturally to me, and that it's gonna make a positive impact in the world, and not just choose something for money or choose something because my parents want me to be that. Like I need to choose something that it's in alignment with who I am as a person. So that's what informed my decision. I was between psychology and social work. So I ended up choosing social work because it was more holistic and you can do more with that in the United States. I don't know about any parts of the world. I'm sure any parts of the world too, but particularly in my environment, it's more recognized. So that's why I chose that. My dad didn't really have a say. I also asked my parents if I could go to boarding school. So I would say that my dad did have a say in that because when he was my age, he wanted to go to a Christian academy as well. And his dad told him no because his mom, my dad's mom, was living in California, and my dad's dad told him he couldn't move there. So that really impacted my dad, and he shared that story with me, and he said that his dad told him that he couldn't do that, and he was so disappointed, and he didn't want me to experience that. So he was on board with my decision. So he backed up my decisions. And when it came to my wife, he didn't choose her. Like he didn't have a say in that. He would encourage me like a man to man. Like he would, before we got married, he would tell me early on, he's like, wow, I think you're going to get married to her. Like, I think this is going to be your future wife. So he did tell me that. And I'm like, really? Why do you think that? I mean, I felt that too, but it was like really more raw conversations with my dad that was impactful for me. My dad, after my conversion, after me surrendering my life to God and actually telling him about what was going on in my life, he would have real conversations with me. Like he couldn't relate, he couldn't understand. So we would talk about that. And it was funny to me because my dad is so straight. Okay, like he's very, very straight. He likes women. He loves my mom. Not to expose him too much, but there was some infidelity in my parents' marriage in my childhood, and they forgave each other and they reconciled and they've moved forward, and nothing has happened since. So my dad would talk to me about that a little bit. Like he's like, how can you be with a man? Like,
yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Have you ever talked to your father about your homosexual lifestyle?
After my conversion, yes.
But not before that?
Not during, no.
So while you was living as a gay, you never talked to your father? I never
talked to my father about it. Actually, in my undergrad, and for my graduation, my boyfriend showed up to my graduation. I didn't introduce him to my family as my boyfriend, but he was my roommate. So I introduced him as my roommate. And it was like not talked about. Like he came to the dinner, and I was expecting my dad to be like aggressive or uncomfortable. But honestly, I was surprised. My dad was actually very respectful. He was very kind to my then boyfriend, But
he didn't know that he's your boyfriend.
I think he knew. I think he was in denial. I think all my family members were in denial about it because, like I said, in my culture, that's something that's not acceptable. And then being Christian, that's not acceptable. So, and then being military, that's not acceptable. Even more so. So, because of those norms in my family and my culture, it wasn't talked about, but they knew intuitively that was my boyfriend. Like my dad told me later on that he had suspicions that I was gay. Like he could tell that something was different with me. So he told me later on because there was room to talk about it.
If you want to think about it and share your thoughts, do you think if your father would be more kind of like bold, and while you live this gay lifestyle, he would come and try to talk to you about it, what kind of impact it would make?
I really don't know because honestly, like growing up, my dad would say mean things about gay people. One time, and that would instill fear in me. And I'm gonna be raw. I don't want to curse, but he did say a curse word. But he did say once, when I was a teenager, he said, if any of my children ever to come out as gay, I would beat out of them, is what he said. And that scared me because I'm like, if he says that, that means I could die. So, and I would think the worst. I'm not saying that my dad will kill me, but he would say that. And that's letting me know what he thinks about those people. And I can identify with those people. So he would say stuff like that. And it made me not trust him even more with my deep feelings and my deep struggles. So yeah, I don't know how that would have gone. I don't know if he would even dare say anything. He never did. So that speaks to how comfortable he was.
You said earlier that you had some expectations from him. You expected him to be on deeper relationship with you, to ask about your feelings, to talk about his feelings. So have you ever come to a point where you felt the need of this reconciliation with your father, to come to another level of connection with him or relationship with him?
I did. You saying that, I feel a little sentimental because I would feel so bitter. I would have this bitterness towards my dad. I was very resentful. And one time, this is when I was in high school, I was venting to one of my best friend's mom. And the Holy Spirit used her because she gave me counsel, and I believed it was God speaking through her to me. And I was telling her that I was going to pray for my dad because he needed to change, because he was a bad person, he was mean, and he was not the person, not the father that I needed. And she told me, Daniel, instead of praying for your dad, you need to pray for yourself. And you need to pray to love your dad, and you need to pray because you can't change your dad. And when she told me that, it was very humbling. It was like a really hard pill to swallow. And I decided to take her counsel, and I started to pray for my dad in a loving way, for God to help me love my dad, because I knew he came from a broken home. He was in the military, and in his generation, things were different. So I needed to have compassion for my dad, who, before he was a dad, he was a person, he was a man. So he had his own baggage. So that helped me have reconciliation with him on one level, because I still had emotional resentment that was legitimate. Like, I did have traumas because of him. I'm just being honest with you. I don't hold that against him now, but I needed to work through that. So that was my responsibility as a young man, to take action with my own emotional well-being and my mental health. So I needed to do that. And I didn't think bad about him, but I held space in prayer, which I believe God helped me to still love my dad. And that was like a journey, because I'm giving it short because there was a lot there, but that's what happened.
So that's probably another benefit of a social work, that you accepted him as who he is. Accepting him with his shortcomings, but at the same time accepting him as your father. And that's very powerful, at least on your end. Did you ever have a moment where you had a reconnection with him, sharing what you was missing from him as father, what you was expecting from him? Open up yourself with him, or it never happened yet?
I would try. When I was in high school, I tried confronting my father. That did not go well. He shut it down. And because I'm a very open, communicative person, so I've always been that way. My parents said when I was born, I was a crybaby, okay? I cried for everything. So as an adult, I don't cry for everything, but I'm verbal. I will communicate. Like, you're going to know what I think, and you're going to know what I feel, even if you don't like it. And I will say it with respect. So I was respectful but vulnerable by confronting my dad, that I wanted to talk about the things that happened that hurt me. So I wanted to tell him that. I wanted not to blame him, but I wanted
share
work it out.
Yeah.
I wanted something more than what we had, and he shut it down. Like, he got really upset, and he said that I needed to pray about it, I needed to go to God about it, and that was my problem, basically. That was really hard. That really hurt me. And I was sobbing, and I was crying. My mom and my dad was there. I think my sister was there. And then another time before I went to high school, I confronted him again. And that blew up as well because, that was disrupting the family system. He's the breadwinner. He's the head of the home. We're supposed to respect him. And I still felt like just because you're the head of the home doesn't mean that you never make mistakes. Like, we can talk about it, and I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to stay in my lane as a child. But I wanted more than what was being given in my environment. So I was going to say something about it, and nothing came about it. So I just accepted that that's just as far as we could go. So I just let it go. Honestly, I just let it go. And to this day, my dad and I, we still have a similar relationship, but it's not like there's no bitterness, there's no resentment. We connect our values about God, about service, about spirituality. That's improvement.
Do you think that it's ever possible that you will come back to this conversation with him about what you was missing, and maybe he would share his side, what he was missing and why he was missing, and have this open conversation between father and son? Hey, we both missed something, but let's start from now on, do something different.
You saying that makes me feel a little sentimental because I hope so. I've been ready for this conversation. I love my dad. I do. I care about him. I don't hate him anymore. I used to. Like, honestly, I was so bitter. I wanted my dad to be dead. I used to pray for him to be dead. And like, thinking about my dad being gone, I'm like, oh no, I don't want my dad to be dead. I love my dad. But we still haven't talked about the skeletons in the closet. And I'm hoping that with time, we can continue to build our relationship to get there. But I don't think it's relevant right now because I'm in another life season, a new season in my life. I'm only like 8 months married with my wife. As of right now, we don't want any children. In my mind, that's a conversation for when we have kids, in my mind, because it's like, all right, we're leveling up to parenthood. So then he's going to feel more like, okay, we can talk about this now. So in my mind, but if we never have kids, which is a possibility, then I don't know if we would ever have the conversation. Maybe when I get older, I don't know, but I'm content with where I'm at now, and we'll see.
Thank you for being open about this challenging moment. You mentioned that your grandfather was distant with your father, and your father, to some extent, he tried to give his love, but still he was distant. Do you think that you broke the cycle?
I believe so. My dad would tell my sister and I growing up, when you guys have children, you guys can do things better than how we did things. And he would say that. So he would say those things, and there was a lot there that he wasn't saying explicitly, but that he was saying. So I believe so. And my eyes are getting a little watery because these last couple days in my devotions, I was reading about the story of Joseph and how he went through a lot of family issues. He was rejected by his brothers. He was sold into slavery, and he became like one of the leaders in Egypt, the top leaders in Egypt. And he was blessed by God because of the lineage that he was from. Basically, I was tearing up this morning because when he was in second in command in Egypt, his family came to Egypt to get food, and he was able to recognize them, but they didn't recognize him because they thought he was dead. They reconciled. He couldn't hold it any longer. There were moments where he would start weeping, and his servants would have to move and leave. And it said in the Bible that all of Egypt could hear his cry. And he was weeping because his family was finally there, and he was finally reunited with his family. He ended up reconciling with them and telling them who he was, because they didn't know who he was anymore. And so they were all crying. It says that he was crying on their neck. And so I imagine they were like hugging each other and crying and like reconciling. And you asking me that question, like I still have that longing in my heart for that experience, to have that with my dad. And we have had moments like that. I shared my testimony for the first time in my church years ago, and my dad was providentially going to be there that weekend to help my sister. So my sister and my dad were there, and there's a photo of me on my dad's shoulder, and I was laughing, and his nose was big and red because he was sentimental. So he's just quiet about it. My dad's not like me, and it's okay. I'm not like him, and you're not like me, and I'm not like you.
Sure.
Every man is unique. And we're still men after all. But that story, the story of Joseph, you know, it just really affirms me, like, I can have that one day. I can be vulnerable. I can be honest and move forward with whatever God has in store for me. And I just hope that the other men that hear this get to do that too, and break whatever cycles that they have in their families, because no man is perfect. But I know for me and my dad, the person that has helped us has been God. And for me, the practical resources that have helped me have been 12-step program, has been therapy with Christian therapists with my same values, and most importantly, a relationship with God and reading scripture and holding on and holding God accountable to his promises. And it has been fulfilled in my life and in the life of my dad. And even though we're still on a journey, like we said in the beginning, it's been very good. It's been a lot of growing pains and more growing pains, but time is too short to live in bondage. And I can testify that God can make things better.
And interesting, you mentioned about God. You know, different people will be watching this program. Some do believe in God, some don't. But interestingly for me, that in the Bible, God presents himself as a father. He could choose probably many different roles. But for some reason, he chose to present himself as a father and his son, Jesus Christ, through whom we can access to the Father. If for some reason it's hard or challenging to build relationship with your biological or earthly father, our Heavenly Father steps in and he's saying, hey, let's work out. However, I see quite often it is important at some point to identify a relationship with a father, with biological father, and try to at least expose yourself. Like what you said, one lady gave you advice, not so much to pray about your father, but to pray about yourself, because really we cannot change anybody except ourselves. However, changing ourselves, we change in perspective and changing the cycle of what does it mean to be a man, and what does it mean to be a husband, what does it mean to be a father. All these questions lead was to understanding that it is important to have this reconciliation. When you mentioned about Joseph, interesting that Joseph mentioned to his brothers, I don't hold anything against you. It was not just, let's not talk about, he was open and he said, you sold me. I went through painful moments in my life, but God did it. God brought me through it, and I don't hold anything against you.
That's beautiful.
You guys are free, and I'm free too. Let's start from the beginning. I hope that they said something as well. I hope that they apologize. I don't know. Bible doesn't, at least I don't.
I didn't read that either, but I
didn't-
read what you were just sharing. I did read that. I don't read that they said anything. I think they were just grateful, like because the burden that they had,
Yes.
it was a heavy burden. There was multiple times where they thought that the things that were happening to them was because they sold him into slavery.
Yes.
So the same thing can be applicable for my story. Like, I'm sure my dad has guilt and shame that he doesn't talk about. And in his generation, in his time, it's not normal to talk about feelings. You have to step up and be a man, or else.
Do
like
more
that was
push-ups.
more, yeah, do more push-ups, do more sit-ups.
Yeah.
So for him, that's why I have compassion for him and empathy for him, because that's all he knew. He did with the best that he could, and that's his journey.
Yes.
I don't want to make it a heavy burden for him. I do want him to feel free, and I think he does feel free, but we haven't really talked about it in depth.
So for those who are watching us, consider it. If it's a good timing, maybe for fathers, maybe it's opportunity to pray and to prepare yourself to talk to your son and talk to your daughter about your personal relationship. As Daniel mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, you said that you're still longing for this moment of conversation with him. And I'm sure there are many children who are waiting for a moment when dad will step in, no matter of age. It might be someone who is 7 years old, who is 50 years old, who is 40, 30, who are waiting for a moment when their father will come in and say, hey, I want to talk to you about. There was something missing in our life. Let's talk about it. We cannot change our past, but we definitely can change our future if we're willing to. Looking back, how would you summarize the overall impact that your father had on your life?
He was my provider. He was my provider in the sense of financially, in my education, investing in a quality of life that was good. And I'm very grateful to my dad for that. Like, not many people get to experience that. And I felt very blessed, and he did the best that he could. And he was there, even though he was deployed a lot. My parents were still married, like he was still part of the family. And I'm grateful that I have my dad.
Anything else you would like to share with other fathers or children in terms of relationship between father and child? Or for fathers, or for children, or for both of them? Would you like to share to those who are watching us?
Sure, yes. I would like to encourage whoever, it can be the father, it could be the child, just to meet each other where you are. If your child is interested in video games, I don't know, Legos, weird things that you're not interested in, okay, it's okay not to like it, but within reason, maybe explore why they like what they like and get to know them. And for the child, have patience for your parent and try to understand where they're coming from. It doesn't always have to be your way. And also communicate, even if they are not receptive. Just communicate to your parents, your dad in particular, what you'd like to do. Give him some ideas, help him out. Sometimes he doesn't know where to start, and it might be awkward. It's okay if it's awkward. And just be encouraged. It's worth the relationship to invest in it, whatever that looks like. Just figure it out together, and I'm sure you guys will find inspiration.
There are different ages, there are different age-appropriate moments. However, if we're talking about more adult child, you're saying that it's a two-way street.
Exactly. And then since you mentioned the younger children, I would emphasize play. That's very good. I remember the day my dad stopped playing baseball with me over video games. That was really impactful for me too. So yeah, play with your child. Just hang out with them. Let them lead. Be messy with them. And especially for their development when they're really young, children, especially like when they're like 3, 4, 5, like they need to start attaching with the same-sex parent because you're going to be the example to them of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman for, females, daughters and mothers for in particular. And I know the emphasis here is like, father, son. So it's important that you yourself know who you are and your values and be able to pass that to your child in a healthy way. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, for sharing and being open with us with your story. I hope that people who will be watching this interview, they will be enlightened. They will gain something from it. And I hope that your relationship with your father, with your biological father, will continue to improve, as well as your relationship with your Heavenly Father. Thank you for being with me today.